Okay, so we're going to talk about shadows. I've got a little shot set up here, more like a photographer than anything. I've got a plane that's my bounce light. It's kind of like the reflector the photographer might hold up to get light to bounce back towards the subject. I got my rim light coming in from the side back, and I got my key light pointing here from the front, kind of a top down. Okay, now I've already got shadows set up on here, so I'm going to go through and just tell you what I did to get them set up. These are just normal lights like you would normally create. And if you select one of those lights and go to your attribute editor and make sure the light shape tab is selected, then you'll scroll down, and before I go to that section, you'll have this shadows section. Okay, it may not be open by default, so you'll open up that section, and you have two different kinds of shadows. You have ray trace shadows and use depth map shadows. I'm just going to show you the ray trace shadows. Anyway, so use ray trace shadows, you just turn that on. You have the light radius attribute, the shadow rays attribute, and the ray depth limit. To be honest, I'm not sure what ray shadow or shadow rays and ray depth limit even are. If you turn it up, I believe the detail of the shadows will be a little bit more precise. Not to mean that the shadow will be hard edged. Not to be confused with hard edge shadows. Hard edge shadows come from fine point lights. And so when you have your light, you can set the penumbra angle, and that will make your light, the border where the light is shining, be, so let me do this. Well, I just turn on the light. I'm reviewing lights. That's the same thing. Clicking this is the same thing as pressing 7 on the keyboard. So this will give a gradient fall off between where the light is shining and where it's not shining. Okay. This light radius is this is kind of a physical measure of the diameter of your light source. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this or not, but if your light comes from a very pinpoint source, then it's going to be a very focused light. And that will produce a very hard edge shadow. So if you increase this light radius, I'm going to turn this down on both of my lights just to show you. If you decrease this down to some infinitesimal number in your render, then your shadow is going to be very hard edged. So there's my shadow from my rim light and my shadow from my key light. Okay, so that's usually not very appealing. It's not very realistic unless you're wanting them to look like the police helicopters caught them. Okay, so if I increase this light radius on both of my lights, this is going to look a little bit more appealing. We're going to see those blur out. Okay, so they're a little bit diffused, I guess maybe that's the right word. They are pixelated, and that's solved somewhere else. I'm not concerned about that, and I'm not even going to show you how to get around it, just so you know. But that's controlling shadows from your lights. Now you have to activate shadows. So this kind of bleeds over into our rendering tutorial. So if we go to our render settings, and you'll want to select render using mental ray. That's Maya's default very nice renderer to turn out really good pictures. If mental ray is not an option, then you'll need to go to Window, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's this Maya TOMR. That stands for Maya to mental ray. You need to tell it to load, and I always check auto load so I don't have to worry about it in the future. And then you can close that. And then render using mental ray will be an option. Okay. Now once you're rendering using mental ray, you want to come into your quality, and this I didn't set, but there's the shadows section. You could do shadow method is simple, sorted, segmented. I'm just going to tell you to experiment. Okay. So I like to change this to legacy sampling mode. And that's pretty much all I do. I'm just kind of browsing around. I shouldn't do that during a tutorial. Anyway, so now that will give you this sort of look. Okay, so that actually made my shadows look a little bit worse. So I would want to go back and play with those settings. Now, I think I'm just going to go ahead and combine all these into one tutorial. So that's how to get the shadows in there, and you may have to do a little research online or just be happy with this, because I'm happy with this. But sometimes you don't want lights to affect certain objects in your scene. So if you select an object or a light, you can go to the window menu and go to Relationship Editors, Light Linking, and then you can tell it to do it light centric or object centric. I'm going to do object centric because I don't want this sphere to be affected by the lighting. So I'm going to find that sphere here, and I'm going to unselect the things on the right side that were affecting it. Okay, now I can close that, and this time when I render, the ball is not lit. Okay, so that's useful if you're trying to light a specific object in your scene, but that's making your other objects look bad. Then you could go through and you could set up lighting per object in your scene. Now that can get really very time consuming, and I don't expect you to do that unless it's very obtrusive and annoying. And then in which case you would probably want to fix it anyway. Okay. So that's shadows, that's light linking. You can also do shadow linking. There's a bunch of different options in this relationship editor. Okay. Now, when it comes to rendering your shot, you're going to want to change a few render settings. So I'm going to go to Render Settings. Clicking on this little clapboard with the two dots next to it, and go to the Common tab. And first section we're going to visit is the file output. I'm going to change this. I don't really want to use my IFF. Let's use a PNG. And you'll need to change this frame/animation extension you'll need to change it from single frame. As long as this is selected, you'll only ever be able to render one frame. Okay, so we're going to change this to name number extension without a dot in between the name and number. At least I am. This one will work with like After Effects and most of your compositing programs. And then you need to tell it a start frame and an end frame. So I'm just going to do 5 frames just for time's sake. We're going to render it by 1 frame at a time. We could tell it to render at each frame. We could do every quarter frame, or we could just do every other frame if we wanted to. Okay. And then we need to tell it which camera in the renderable camera section. We need to tell it which camera that we want to render. And you can create your own cameras if you want to. Okay, so we're going to use perspective. And then you'll need to choose your image size. For our project, I want everything rendered at this HD 720. I'm going to give you a nice, really nice image, but not be too overly demanding on the rendering time. You can, if you want to, go all the way up to 1080. Maya will let you go up to like 4K or whatever you want, but for our project, HD 720 is it. Okay, now that's all that you need to set. That's all that you need to set in here. Assuming that you've done all this, you've set the quality, and you've done all the things you needed to do for your shadows and stuff, which we've already gone through. Okay, so after you've got all those set, you can close this window. Then if you switch to from your animation menu set to rendering, then you can go to render, batch render, option box, and you just got a few options in here. Basically, you can just leave these as is unless you have problems. If you have problems with like network rendering, which I can't remember if these computers are networked or not, which means it would use all the computers in the lab to try to render as long as they're available, and you would get a lot faster job done. Or if they're not available, then it's just going to use the local machine, the one that Maya is running on. Okay, then we can just click batch render. It's going to ask me to save my project because I'm using a student version. And then down here in this feedback line, it's going to tell me rendering using Mental Ray. And after it does a little bit of processing, it's going to go through and it's going to show me what percentage is done on each image. So it's going to render the first 5 frames. It says 0% right here is done on the first image. Here, 0001. Now it's working on 0002. And because I only set my frame range to 5, it's going to do 5 of those. It's important to note where it's saving these to. So it will save them to your images folder of your project if you've set your project. If not, it's going to save them to the images folder of the default Maya project. So that'll be where they reside. And then when it's done, it'll say rendering completed. And there's a render log you can look at if you want to. Anyway, so the render is done. Okay. Now once the render is done, you need to navigate to where those files are at. And they're going to be inside of a folder called master layer. So there's my 5 images from my render. Now all mine are identical because I didn't have any motion. in there. But you'd want to go through and check these to make sure they really are what you wanted them to be. Now you can see that this is not going to look that hot because my shadows are, it's re-rendering my shadows every time, right? So they're going to boil. So I can preview the rendering. Maya has a built-in editor for that. If I right click and go to open with, and it's not listed, so we'll go to choose default program. We'll have to browse. It's kind of annoying, but it's necessary. We go to Autodesk, Maya 2015, go to the bin folder, and there's this program called fcheck.exe. Open it with that. Okay, so now it opens that single image with it, but we want to see the animation. So we just go to File, Open Animation. You just select the first image in the sequence, click Open, and then it runs through the animation once and loads the buffer, loads all the images into memory, and then it will play back the animation. And you can see that the shadows are boiling on mine because they suck, but that's good enough for us right now. Okay, anyway, so that's how you render, and this would be your finished footage for your shot. So you'd want to save this out as a movie file. You can use like After Effects to composite those into a movie, MP4 or MOV or whatever you want, and upload those to the internet for your final, in which you can then give me a link and it's turned in. Now, just a little warning, I always get students who submit me a link and they've made it private so I can't view it, or they never checked it, and YouTube downsized their video for some whatever reason, and instead of a 720p image movie, I have like a 480 by 320 pixel image, and I don't want to see that. So you'll want to double check after you've uploaded it that it really is what you expect it to be, and then give me the link. I will make one more tutorial on compositing the imagery in After Effects, but it should be really easy.